With the Pledge of Allegiance, if you could please stand. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. Christina will do the roll call. Thank you.
John Winchester.
Here.
Melissa Brown Rodriguez. Kelly Lee.
Here.
Charlene Robinson.
Present.
Lucretia Free.
Present.
Tom Resney.
Present.
Frank Sandaboo.
Here.
Ed Berber. John Bernal.
Here.
Frank Fry. Bill Schlesinger.
Thank you, Christina. Moving on to the approval of the meeting summary. Is there a motion to approve? Approves.
Motion to approve.
Tom approves. A second?
I'll second.
Thanks, Sean. Is there any discussion about the meeting minutes? Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
Thank you. Any opposed? Okay, it's passed. Moving on to the future county sources of funding. This is about the toll road funds. So I'm going to read what Ed sent me. The toll roads paper is one of a number of potential revenue options to fund road improvements and maintenance proposed by committee members. John Winchester suggested this topic, and it is the last one on our list. Some comments related to the toll roads include, while not in use in Arizona, this revenue source is used by 35 states. Although there are a number of restrictions related to this revenue source, it does not necessarily eliminate it from our consideration. If RTA Next is not approved by voters, arterial road funding will be more limited, and toll roads may be a possibility if there is enough support by the public. We will review all the options in the next month's meeting to determine if any merit consideration for future funding by the County Board of Supervisors. I will now open the floor for comments by committee members related to the draft toll roads paper. Does anyone have any comments on that paper?
This is Lucretia. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I just had a question, and apologies if you guys discussed this previously. We can't be the first ones to come up with this idea of toll roads. So why haven't toll roads been used throughout the state? Does anybody know?
So we have done a little bit of research on that. Let me walk up to the podium there. So thank you, Madam Chair. I'm Paul Casertano. I'm the Deputy Director under Catherine. We have looked at the toll road options and opportunities throughout the years, including research back to my colleague Jonathan Crow many years ago. As we look at it now in the current state of Arizona, with moves recently by the state legislature, there have been prohibitively more layers of restriction put onto toll road opportunities in Arizona. The latest of which is restrictions regarding the conversion of any roadways or facilities where there has been any use of public funding to a toll road facility. So that makes it prohibitively more difficult and essentially requires a full private funded facility and endeavor in toll roads. And so, not to say that it couldn't happen, but the business model looks a little bit different than it looks in most of the other states where there is that public-private partnership that's a little bit more of a split endeavor or a joint venture. This is placing the burden largely on the private side and keeping transportation funding out of the equation for the most part.
Really on the toll road topic, but this isn't really specifically on the toll road topic, but this reminds me that I-11 is a project that's still kicking around out there somewhere, very long term, and perhaps we can get a future update on that project, Madam Chair, just to get an idea, because more than likely, it's one of these massive creative interstate highways that will probably require some creative financing to ever come to be.
Absolutely right.
Madam Chair,
Yes, go ahead.
this is Supervisor Steve Christie. I'd like to briefly just speak about the issue of toll roads. When I served on the State Transportation Board, that was brought up on numerous occasions, particularly that section that is intended to be the north part of I-11 from outside of Phoenix up to Las Vegas. That particular road was very dangerous and had multiple issues as far as being able to, of connectivity and safety and things of that nature, that was going to require a substantial amount of money. And the subject of toll roads came up at that particular point, and there were a lot of conflicting layers involved with toll roads, not the least of which was the Truckers Association had objections to it, and of course it was viewed as another tax on the public, which was already paying for the roads itself. And I think on numerous occasions, ADOT had put together requests or studies or information on toll roads. And they all fizzled out. They just fell in dispopularity, and they were bypassed. And it's as Ms. Free says, this was not the first time that they'd gone through this process of considering toll roads. And if it didn't work up in the Phoenix area up in there, I'm certain that it would have a very negative effect down here too. So that's just my experience, Ed. I just wanted to share that with you.
Thank you, and welcome Supervisor Christie to our meeting today. Any other?
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments on toll roads? Discussion?
I had a quick question for Paul. So you were talking about new statutes that limit conversion of an existing road or what has been, say, road to toll road. Does that also apply to, say, a public right-of-way that's never had a road, or would a private entity also have to acquire a whole right-of-way corridor if you were to try to build a toll road?
Thank you, Sam, for the question, Madam Chair. That remains a bit unclear, so we haven't done a deep dive into the legal details of what it exactly means. So we don't really have that answer. We don't really know. I'm hopeful that there could be some right-of-way accommodations, but I can't say for sure.
Yes, thank you.
Anything else? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Moving on to the Prosperity Initiative, and we have Bonnie, Nicole, and Jonathan.
On there. I'm Nicole by the County Administrator's Office, and I'm just going to see if Bonnie's still on there with us, because I think she's going to lead the first few slides. Can you hear us, Bonnie?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me okay, everyone?
Yes.
Madam Chair and Commission members, thank you so much for this opportunity to be with you today. I'm Bonnie Bazzata. I work with Pima County and with Nicole on this Prosperity Initiative. And this is an effort to see how we can focus policy to be able to reduce intergenerational poverty in particular and increase prosperity through building resources, opportunities, and assets for low-income families. So we've been taking a deep look at policies. So just to frame this up a little bit, next slide, please. We know that we have high rates of poverty in Pima County. And we also know that children are the population that has the highest rates of poverty. So that should be a real concern to all of us. We know that the sooner you're in poverty, the longer you are, the harder it is to break out of that cycle. Next slide. And we know that it shows up very differently across our geography. We have places with very high rates of poverty, other places with lower rates, and that's an important part of this perspective. If I could get the next slide, please. And so researchers will tell us that there are 4 approaches to addressing poverty. We can prevent it, we can alleviate suffering, we can aid the transition to economic stability for those families, and we can address structures. And I'm so sorry I can't be in the room with you today, but if I were able to see you, I would ask you of those 4 things, what do we tend to do the most of in our communities? And generally the response is 2. We focus on alleviating suffering, which is very important. This is no argument to reduce that. But this initiative is really looking at how do we get further upstream? How do we try to do a better job at prevention, addressing those structures, and aiding people to be able to break the cycle? So this is an upstream approach. Next slide, please. And so our task has been to do some very intensive research and look for evidence-based research that tells us that a particular focus in a policy area is likely to have the best chance of just reducing poverty. And we want to look at approaches that will address immediate needs, but we really want to think about that longer term picture. Next slide, please. And so we have to think about also what fits our toolbox. We know a lot of policy is written for the state and federal level around poverty reduction. So we're looking at what can fit into our local government toolbox. If something's too small, it's a program idea. If it's too big, we can consider that as an advocacy possibility. Next slide. And we have a working group from all of the governments in Pima County that meets monthly and is helping to guide this. And our goal is that we could work as a region so that each of the different municipalities could adopt or adapt policies that seem like the best fit for their particular community. Next slide. And we have 2 University of Arizona researchers in sociology with expertise in poverty, Brian Mayer and Keith Bentley, who've been working intensively with us. And then next slide. We're approaching this in 2 phases. So in our policy development phase, we've had lots of stakeholder meetings, from people with lived experience to people who are working programs and addressing this issue locally to national experts. And right now we're looking at 12 policies with 3 sort of what we call cross-policy strategies. And then in our second phase will really be that operational phase where we're reviewing and looking at how we might better align where we are currently putting our spending and our resources, looking at how we develop different matrix for each policy, and continue to get some robust community input as we move forward. Next slide, please. And so we're looking at these policies in these areas of education, critical family resources, which includes housing, workforce development, jobs, neighborhood investment, and asset building and infrastructure priorities. And then we have these cross-policy strategies. So we know that's kind of our overview, and I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Nicole now, who's really been guiding us on the development of a transportation policy.
Thank you, Bonnie. I was going to say good morning. I guess it's good afternoon now to the committee. It's been a long time since I've been here. I think I used to attend these. Pam, can you hear?
Nicole, are you able to step in?
I think she's good. Okay. All right, so transportation and poverty. If you could go to the next slide. So So with each of these policy areas, and I think in the materials that you received for this meeting, you saw 10 or so policy areas that we're looking at in addition to transportation. And so for all of these, we're developing policy briefs that really show the detailed research and how it applies to Pima County and Tucson and cities and towns, and really trying to understand, which areas have the most opportunity to really move the needle when it comes to generational poverty. Next slide. And so let me say, transportation and poverty, there's definitely much more research on poverty and housing and transportation and health and in a number of other areas. It definitely seems that transportation and poverty is getting more attention lately, and I think you will see more research in the future in this area. But we have plenty to share with you. So in our other policy areas on housing and health and education and so on, though all of those require connections, and connections can either occur physically, like we're talking about in this policy, or digitally, we have a digital inclusion policy, or through home services and so on. So here we're really looking at, what does transportation look like for our disadvantaged communities in Pima County and cities and towns, and what works in the area of transportation and land use. So although we're calling this transportation, a lot of it has to do with land use and what the proximity of different uses are to each other. And we're looking for things like, what type of interventions increase employment, increase wages, or decrease household expenses for low-income families. Next. So you can consider this like a capital D, capital C disadvantaged communities, or lowercase. In the case of the U.S. Department of Transportation, in compliance with the Justice 40 initiative, right, they've identified disadvantaged communities in areas of persistent poverty across the U.S., and this map actually shows up better in the materials that we gave you. But generally, the areas that are identified as disadvantaged communities are up and down I-10 and I-19 through Tucson, southwest of Tucson, northwest flowing wells going into southern Marana. You see Catalina on there. And whether or not Pima County or other cities and towns want to use these maps or focus on these disadvantaged community mapped areas, if you overlap this with the high poverty areas that Bonnie showed you, or other indices that our cities and towns have come up with, a lot of the same areas come up regardless. Next. Another index that we looked at, which was really interesting, is the Center for Neighborhood Transportation. And it says a housing and transportation index, but there's a lot of other data in there. So you can zoom into different cities and towns, or right down to the census tract level, or Pima County itself, and you can pull up fact sheets. And there's information on housing and transportation costs, information on transit access, vehicles mile traveled, like all sorts of information that was helpful to look at this. So when we're reviewing the national research, we can kind of see what the issues are here locally. So next. All right, so one of the areas we were really interested in is employment and wages. So there are quite a few studies that show, and let me just say, some of this is going to be obvious to you, but we still obviously have to have research to support this, right? So access to cars and high quality transit has a positive impact on employment and wages for those in poverty. And the effect for those who own cars is considerably greater. And this comes from a wealth of different studies, but in particular, there were some large studies, including thousands of households that were receiving rental housing assistance over 10 metro areas across the U.S. And they're considered robust studies because they had control groups, and some of the families were allowed to use their rental housing assistance to move to better neighborhoods. Some of them had to use them in the existing neighborhoods. Some had cars, some didn't. And what they found was those that had cars chose to move to these better, higher quality, lower income neighborhoods. They tended to stay there longer. Immediate health benefits to the families, the parents that moved there. For the kids, longer term, because they track these kids like over time. Their educational attainment and their incomes were higher in adulthood. And in particular, this isn't saying that that cars are better than transit or transit's better than cars. It's just the fact that across the U.S., we don't have a ton of cities that have really high quality transit that can compete with the convenience that we have with cars. And so across Pima County, again, if you go back to those other indices I was looking at, right, we know we have some areas that have a lot better access to transit, and there are other areas that are a lot more car dependent. And in Pima County, and again, when we say Pima County, we're talking about everybody in Pima County, not just unincorporated Pima County. 7% of households don't own cars. We don't have that broken down by demographics, but I think we can assume some portion of that are low-income families. Some are probably elderly who don't drive anymore or may have disabilities. Some may live around the university and not need cars, and so on. Next. So even though we know we have a lot of low-income families here in Pima County that own cars are obviously very expensive to own and maintain and operate and so on. So, and I found this to be interesting. I did not realize how much I even personally spent driving until I took a look at this. But so this is average household transportation and housing costs across Pima County, and then if you just look at Tucson. And if you look at Tucson, it's equal. So families are spending equal on housing and transportation. In Pima County, it's almost equal. And then if you just look at those disadvantaged neighborhoods, so from the first map, those in central Tucson, while they're spending less than average, they're still spending over 15% of their household income on transportation, or over $9,000 annually. And for disadvantaged areas outside of central Tucson, so think suburbs and rural areas, they're spending a lot more, obviously. And these numbers don't reflect the difference between renters and homeowners. So when you look at that housing column and how much households are spending on housing, we know that renters in Pima County, a lot of them are spending more than 30% of income on rent, which is, for those of you in the housing field, is like the housing cost burden percentage for housing. Next. So we also looked at studies that on subsidies for transportation, whether it be, free or reduced bus fares, subsidies for workforce, those who are in workforce training programs and so on, or those who are going to college. And when we get to transit and free fares, I'm sure many of you are aware that our transit systems here in Pima County are still operating on a free fare basis. So that's both the city system, the RTA system, and the Oro Valley system. And Oro Valley in particular, and let me just say it's been very interesting talking to the city and town staff about this particular policy. They've been very interested in it. And so those who work on the Oro Valley transit system, they've seen their transit ridership double since the pandemic. And they also pointed out that 90% of the Oro Valley transit system is funded by RTA, so they are very much interested in what happens with RTA next to ensure that they can keep funding that transit system. Pima County Job Training Program, so in the department that Bonnie works in, Community and Workforce Development, we use federal workforce development funds to fund job training. And a certain amount is able to be allocated for transportation subsidies and other supportive services. And studies show that folks who receive those supportive services, including transportation subsidies, are more likely to do well in those training programs and go on to better employment and wages. We also spoke with Pima Community College workforce development folks, and they really felt that local governments could address two primary barriers to college, and one was transportation and the other was childcare. And they have been very vocal in reviewing the, I'm not going to remember what it's called, what's the COA? Yeah, so something that the city's undertaking right now for transit and looking at routes and so on, so they've been very interested in that. And then employee travel reduction programs. So Pima County and the city of Tucson have ordinances that require employers, large employers, or if you would say large with employees over 100, employers that have employees over 100, to produce plans and travel reduction efforts, and this is actually managed by RTA, and that can actually reduce costs and traffic congestion and pollution long term, but can really be beneficial to low-income employees. Next. All right, land use and transit-oriented development. So as I mentioned before, this is as much a land use policy as it is a transportation policy in areas where we have things closer together, if houses are closer together, jobs and services and so on. It reduces, and I would say how many cars you probably in Tucson need as a family, right? So we're not sort of advocating here for getting rid of cars in any way whatsoever. And it's more likely that, especially if you're a family and you have kids, you probably need one car, but maybe you could get down to not having two cars, and then that would be a good cost savings for a low-income family. And so this, our patterns of development over Pima County, right, vary greatly depending on whether you're in Flowing Wells or downtown Tucson or out in Arivaca and so on. Commute times and poverty, I included this here too because this really gets into land use, and if you start paying attention to this issue at all, it comes up. So there's a very large study out of Harvard and Opportunity Insights where they followed 20 million children who were born in the US in the 1980s, and they followed them into adulthood. And they used census data as well as IRS data. And the results of this started to come out before the pandemic, but I'm not sure if it's well known or not. But really showed how important it is, what neighborhood, what city, what town, what county you grow up in, especially for low-income families, and how well you're going to do economically at adulthood. Fortunately, Tucson and Pima County were very low on that, compared to other towns and counties on that, on the initial findings, particularly for low-income children, compared to other places in the U.S. A lot less opportunity to improve economically. But in particular, one of the variables they looked at was commute times. So, and in this case, our commuter zone is considered the county. So in commuter zones where commute times are shorter, or you have people that have a lot lower commute times, low-income families or low-income children do better at adulthood. And they use this variable as a measure of sprawl, but they still don't exactly know what this is telling, but I think it's worth mentioning. Next. All right, so there was actually just an article about this in the Star this morning, which moved us up from the 13th most dangerous metro area for pedestrians to the 10th most dangerous, which is not great. And also, it also broke it up by small, medium, and large cities. So Tucson, compared to just cities of its size, is now ranked third worst in the U.S. And Phoenix, being the million and over category, is ranked number 1 worst in the country. So we're both looking here at lower income individuals, elderly that happen to live in areas where there's probably higher pedestrian use and so on, and then they're more subject to these events. And so also we're looking at disadvantaged communities that are subject to various environmental issues that are caused in part by vehicles. Next. So overall, what we're saying is, right, we have to have a continued coordination between transportation planning, housing, land use, education, and employment. We really have to make an extra effort to involve disadvantaged communities at sub-regional and neighborhood level planning efforts. We know that they're less likely to be able to or be participating in a lot of our planning efforts. We're looking for ways to reduce transportation costs, improve both car and high-quality transit options, so not one over the other. We know that rural areas are going to have very different needs than suburban areas and urban areas, and so for Pima County, even if we're only looking at unincorporated Pima County, which I understand most of the time we are with our transportation department, we have a little bit of all of this. We're looking to improve traffic safety and reduce fatalities and reduce exposure to pollutants. Next. And so this is our very long-worded policy statement, right? Because we always have to try to figure out how to get everything in there. And so I'll leave it on the screen for a little bit for you to read if you haven't read the materials. I tend to just think of it as let's pay more attention to the needs of these communities. And with that, I'm going to ask Jonathan Crow, who's with your transportation department, to come talk about some implementation ideas. So for each of these policies, we know policy level is really a longer term intention level, but we try to give policymakers, in this case the Board of Supervisors and our mayor and councils of the various cities and towns, some ideas of how things like this may be implemented.
Thank you, Nicole. Just a couple more slides here, so if we can move to the next one. Nicole's already kind of touched base on kind of most of these implementation ideas, but I'll kind of run through these. So the first one is developing multimodal transportation plans with a sub-regional focus that particularly focused on the disadvantaged communities. So that's kind of the unifying term throughout this whole presentation, and about the whole objective is to focus on disadvantaged communities, and we can do that at the planning level by focusing our plans and including that particular group. Number 2 there is developing an index that prioritizes projects in disadvantaged communities and that benefits disadvantaged communities. Third, we need to consider both car-based and transit-based solutions. So the solution is not just, put transit everywhere if you had all the money in the world. We have to recognize that we are a car-based community, particularly in Pima County, and the further out you go, and you're going to have to develop car-based solutions that transit just simply can't provide. Fourth is the county is already starting this process with our Safe Streets for All federal grant that we're just starting right now. A requirement for that federal grant is to focus on disadvantaged communities. So as part of that plan, we're going to be focusing on analyzing impacts and benefits to disadvantaged communities, and that's going to be sort of an initial implementation step that we've already got in place. And then the last bullet there is to continue to advocate for the transit needs of disadvantaged communities through the PAG-RTA Transit Working Group. That group meets almost monthly, on a regular basis to look at prioritization and potential changes to our transit system. And while we've always looked at how we're best serving the community, I think we can continue to look at how the disadvantaged communities in particular are affected by our current and future transit changes. Next slide, please. And this is the last slide. So again, the first bullet is focusing on land use and zoning code changes that encourage mixed use and transit-oriented development and multifamily housing. The Pima Prospers update, which is currently ongoing with Pima County, and we've just initiated, is going to have an opportunity to make some of these recommendations moving forward that we can kind of include kind of different and better land use decisions that might benefit disadvantaged communities. Secondly, Nicole mentioned improvements to the travel reduction program, which in some cases provides subsidy for people to use transit and to have other means of getting home through their work. There's opportunities to improve that program. As client need, third issue there, developing or identifying client needs through our workforce training program to provide a transportation assistance. So for people who need a way or a better way to get to and from workforce training and get to their jobs, there's opportunities there to improve that assistance. The last two are efforts to increase housing has got to include both renters and homeowners. It's not just a one-size-fits-all. We've got to address the number of people who rent and have transportation needs in addition to those who own their own homes, and that's going to be a continued focus. And then the last bullet is just simply looking towards electrification, and by that I mean providing more charging stations and opportunities for people to use electric vehicles and to use electric buses in the transit system. That's something that the county is interested in and moving forward, and it's going to have to include opportunities for the disadvantaged communities as well. I think that's all the slides we have, and we can take questions from members at this point. Thank you.
Madam Chair, thank you. Jonathan, I've got a question for you, actually, but thanks, Nicole. And you mentioned that, you're evolving this implementation strategy, and I've been listening to the RTA Next development, especially through the Citizen Advisory Committee, and they're really focusing on transit most recently. And what I keep hearing from the RTA staff is it's got to be consistent with the long-range transit plan, or else the staff, it sounds like to me, will not be supportive of it to the RTA board. So is the timing off here is the question, because the RTA Next obviously is a great funding opportunity for the next 20 years. Are you guys going to be, involving yourselves or inserting yourselves with this policy and program in a timely fashion is the question.
Well, it's a good question, John, and I think, with all planning and implementation programs, the timing sometimes works out and sometimes it's ahead or behind. In this case, I think there's a lot of momentum towards identifying disadvantaged impacts and prosperity in the community. I mean, it's not just Pima County that's looking at this right now. I think communities across the country are increasingly focusing on disadvantaged communities. The federal government is making it a requirement now for disadvantaged grants that we analyze and look at impacts to disadvantaged communities. So I think the timing for dealing with prosperity and looking at disadvantaged communities is ripe, and it's now. How that fits into the current plan for RTA Next is kind of a coincidence. I think there may be opportunities to address some of these issues with RTA Next. I mean, it's not a done deal yet, and we still have some time to refine that program before it gets put out to the voters. So I think there's still a window there where we could potentially incorporate some ideas moving forward. But I think in general, the recommendation that the RTA CAC has put forth, focusing on transit needs, that in and of itself, I think, provides a lot of benefits to these kind of communities that we're talking about here. So I think just the effort that the CAC is moving forward towards having adequate funding for transit is in and of itself going to be a benefit to these communities. Whether or not that extends beyond the transit category into roadways is another issue. I mean, it's kind of a bit of a different approach to transportation planning to be focusing or having as much of a focus on disadvantaged communities. And that really hasn't been the primary focus for Pima County nor for all the agencies here locally. So I think that's going to be evolving over time. The City of Tucson's Move Tucson plan sort of took a first crack at that in the last year in looking at impacts to these communities and trying to establish some kind of prioritization that benefited those communities more. And I think there's an opportunity for that with long-range planning as well as short-term, what I would call short-term planning with RTA Next.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Hi there, this is Lucretia.
Go ahead.
I had a question. Thank you guys for your very thorough presentation. Can someone tell me specifically how our PTAC can be of assistance in helping you meet your goals?
Good afternoon, Lucretia.
Hello?
Yep, sorry, it took me time to get up here. Nicole Fife. I know that this
Hey,
is...
Nicole.
I know, hi there. I know this is very different than some of the subjects that you typically are weigh in on. There's no right or wrong way here. This is brand new to a lot of us, and including some of your transportation staff here. So if there's any comments, questions, anything that you want to provide at this time, otherwise, we're not asking for anything specific. This is really awareness. Eventually, we wanted to be able to come to each board-appointed committee and board and so on to talk about the relevant policies before we take something to the Board of Supervisors, but we're not asking for any kind of an action.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments from the committee?
May I just add this?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. Ronaldo Santa Cruz, I'm a homeowner in Pima County, live in California, and I'm an observer in state. But in your list of partners that you showed at the beginning, you showed City of South Tucson, City of Tucson, and a variety of other agencies. I'd recommend perhaps inviting the school districts from pre-K up to 12, in addition to Pima County Community College, and possibly the U of A. That way you have the education pre-K through higher education covered, and maybe be able to provide assistance to some of the statistics or outreach to the families that you need to reach. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Anything else?
So I don't know how you can call the audience. If there's somebody on this particular topic, would you like to hear from them now or later?
We can hear from them now.
Thank you.
How much time would you like me to take?
For this one, 3 minutes.
Very good. Thank you so much. My name is Penny Pessel, and I am board president of the Sahuarita Food Bank and Community Resource Center in Sahuarita. And I am here today to speak particularly to the needs of disadvantaged rural communities. Sahuarita serve many people in the surroundings of Sahuarita and Green Valley. And these folks live in small communities like Arivaca and Amado and Helmet Peak and Corona de Tucson and so forth and so on, three points, et cetera. And I want to really give an amen to the presentation that Nicole and her colleagues just gave, because there are many themes that are extremely similar, more anecdotal work that we have done. In particular, this issue of access to education, to work, to services is such a critical issue for chronically disadvantaged communities. And one of the things we look at as a food bank is not just feeding people, but also helping people move to a sustainable economic place. And so we see both of those things as critically important for people's overall health. I kind of equate it to the issue of the last mile or miles in digital connectivity. If we haven't served the transit last miles to people who are in rural communities at a distance, we are having the same challenges that we're having in terms of equity and connectivity and an opportunity to progress as the digital connectivity issue presents. So I think the two are really in some ways very similar, and they're both costly to address the last miles or mile for these folks. We did do a survey of about 300 people in the community, along with a number of other organizations that form we revealed that Southern Arizona do have cars, very consistent with the research that the Prosperity Initiative has done. But their impediments in terms of having cars are they're old, often, they're not reliable. The cost of gas is significant, more particularly in the last. So those, also they're more polluting because they have. So those cars, although they're there, and also to maintain for some of these communities is 30 or 40 minutes away. So it really makes it difficult for people to break out of their normal patterns when there are constraints like transportation limitations. Major points, healthcare. We have a United Community Health Center in our area. They serve patients with cancer, and we have been told frequently that if someone is diagnosed with a cancer that can be treated, if they can't get to treatment, they choose to go on hospice. And to me, this is just since the lack of transportation is sentencing people to death. And I don't mean to be overdramatic. I'm not an overdramatic person, but I just find that absolutely incredible. Another area, our workforce development classes that we offer at the Sahuarita Food Bank and Community Resource Center attract a lot of local people who would choose to come to us rather than have to undertake the challenge of transportation. And even if they do get county support, federal money flowing through the county for transportation assistance, the maximum amount allowable is $500. And that includes all the other supportive services they might need to be able to go to school. So it's not a very high opportunity what you are doing. Thank you so much for listening, and I very much appreciate the work that all of you are doing.
Thank you. Okay, is there anything else under this topic? Moving on to road repair update, Jason.
All right. Madam Chair, members of the committee, thank you for your time. We're proud to present this month's update for our road repair and preservation program. So getting started off, we'll kind of go through some projects that are in construction currently for this fiscal year. And the first one to talk about is the Community of West Day Linda Vista Terrace ADA curb ramp project. We've briefly talked about this one before, so we'll go through it fairly quickly and just kind of a status update on it. The portion of the curb ramps and sidewalk repair along Community of West Day is wrapping up this week, and the contractor is moving over into the Linda Vista Terrace subdivision. They're right on schedule currently and moving quickly towards completing this project toward the end of October. So this one's moving along quite quickly. The next project, just to talk about briefly, is the North Metro Area Crack Seal project. So this one has been quickly moving along as well, and the contractor is quickly moving towards completion of this project as well, and so we do anticipate this one moving into the completion column here within the next several weeks, just like that last project that we talked about. Another project in construction, our third different type of project. This is our Indian Ridge Terrace Mill and Pave project. So this is in the Indian Ridge Terrace subdivision off of Sabino Canyon and Tenca Verde. And this project just started with milling and paving this week. So they've been doing their utility lowering in the past couple weeks, as well as some miscellaneous curves repair to get ready for schedule as well. And they are moving toward paving expected complete. So they're right on schedule as well, moving towards that expected completion date prior to the end of November. So then getting into some projects that haven't quite yet started construction. This is our Heritage Hills ADA curb ramp project, the second of our two curb ramp projects for this fiscal year. This is in the Heritage Hills subdivisions. There's two Heritage Hills subdivisions in this project. I don't think we had the map to show you last meeting, so the map is there for you this time. So you can see the one Heritage Hills subdivision is off of Ina and Camino de la Tierra and Shannon area. They're south of the CDO wash, and then the other one is up off of Thornydale to the south of McGee. Both of these subdivisions have ADA curb ramps that are going to get addressed with this project, and they're in the next couple start this toward the contractor is here within the next couple weeks, along for middle of October, and that project will go along for several months into calendar year 2024. It's a quite a bit larger project than the other curb ramp project that we mentioned. Another project to discuss, this is our East Metro crack seal. So we've mentioned this one previously, so just a quick update on it. Excuse me. Just a quick update on this one. This is the area around Bear Canyon Road, as well as some areas off of Tenca Verde Road out in District 1 and 4. This contractor, Southern Arizona Paving, is planning to begin this work toward the late October, early November timeframe, and it should move along fairly quickly as well when that gets going. The third of our three crack seal projects for this fiscal year to talk about, the South Metro area crack seal, is also getting ready to get going here shortly. This contractor is Tucson Asphalt, and they're expecting to begin their work in the middle to early portion of October. So within the next couple weeks, this project should get kicked off and going. So some projects we haven't talked about yet. So some new projects to make you all aware of. This is our Northwest Mill and Pave project. There are two roads on this project. This is Bowes Road to the north of Snyder and Reddington Road to the east of Wentworth. This project it says package prep, but I can actually update you now that it has been advertised. So this project is on the street. It was advertised on the 19th, and our bid opening for this is on the 5th of October. So this project will be getting awarded here in the next couple of weeks. Another project to talk about, our South Arterial Surface Treatment project. This project also has been advertised now. It was advertised on the 19th as well, with the bid opening on the 5th of October. This is in Districts 2 and 4, and there are two roads on this package as well. This one is Saurito Road and Nogales Highway. So Nogales Highway from Pima Mine Road up to Lumber, and Saurito Road all the way from the eastern edge of the town of Saurito to Highway 83. So the whole large stretch of Saurito Road. You can see there's 20.59 miles of arterial collector road in this package, and the engineer's estimate is $1.3 to $1.6 million. So where does that put us on the grand scheme of this fiscal year? You can see our project status by the dollars. Some of those from the package preparation item have moved into the advertised column, which is shown as a 0 currently, but those two projects that we just talked about at the end are in that advertised column now, as well as some other pie chart will get moved into the in construction column. Those shortly. So that pie chart will start advertised column, moving towards with a few joining the complete column here shortly as well. With that, I'd like to just remind everyone that, as always, you can view the status of all the roads selected for this fiscal year as well as past fiscal years on our road repair and preservation map, and the link is there on the screen for you as well. And with that, I will open to any questions that anyone has. I must have done a good job this time.
Right.
Come on, Tom, you have to give me something.
I got nothing, Jason.
Perfect.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to RTA next.
Good afternoon, committee. I'm Catherine Skinner, the Director of Transportation for Pima County. Every month, I come and give the update on what's happening with RTA Next development. And so I will do that again. I will say there's not been as much activity between our last meeting and today as some of the other meetings. But this week, the RTA board will be meeting on Thursday. This is the first check-in they've had since July, when they gave the CAC and TMC through December to develop their plan recommendations. So this will be a check-in point by the CAC chair and vice chairs, as well as the TMC liaisons, to report to the RTA board how the development is going. All other decisions they made and recommendations in their July meeting still stand, including that we're looking at a 0.5-cent sales tax as opposed to any sort of other tax rate. The CAC continues to have conversations, and as Mr. John Bernal said, a lot of those have been focusing on the transit sub-element or transit category of the RTA Next plan, wrestling with the size, how much of the RTA Next funding should go towards transit, looking at it as a percentage basis, what went in the existing RTA versus the new RTA. So that's a conversation that continues to happen. The CAC chair also directed another round of prioritization of those named projects that remain on the list. This is due to the fact that the initial cost estimates that were prepared by HDR for all of the named projects were about 31% higher than what we thought those estimates were. So we have to squeeze a bit, and going through this prioritization is one means of trying to narrow down where that funding may end up going with which projects. And then lastly, the Technical Management Committee has met. They met back at the end of August, and they met last week actually again. And so they continue to have conversations. They have the liaisons, both Town Manager Terry Rosema from Marana, as well as Deputy County Administrator Carmine DeBonis, that sit in on all these CAC meetings to really have a point of connection and conversation between the two committees. TMC has focused their conversations on the cost estimates, how much did they grow, what does this mean overall for the program, but in terms of prioritizing the projects, I really would say that they're looking towards the CAC to take that lead on what we're looking for in terms of the entire composition. I will remind you, December is when the board has said they'd like this proposal. There is still a significant amount of work out there to get a plan together, but everybody is working very hard every day to try to get there. And I'll turn it over to Mr. Bernal if he'd like to share anything else. He's on the TMC.
Thank you, Nicole. Madam Chair, I think the only thing that's come to my attention recently, and I communicated this a little bit with Catherine, the city of Tucson is pretty much rethinking their submittal. And they went to their mayor and council recently and said, we think we've gotten a little too far away from our own planning within the city. I don't know what the new package that we propose to present to the RTA, I don't know what that means exactly, whether that's gonna, and of course, they're encouraging the other jurisdictions to do the same thing. So I think that's just one observation. We'll see how that plays. The other one is, I think Catherine touched on how big this new round of estimating has changed the projects. And so it's true, I think there's going to be a lot of concentration on that long list of road segments, because 30%, they had about 30
Projects?
something like that. But, or
I
now,
think
that was
to 37
30,
projects.
something like that. But obviously, that was based on the old estimates. And now that we're talking about these new estimates, and we're staying apparently with a 1.1 billion allocation for road segments, you're gonna see that list pared down considerably, given these new estimates. So we'll wait and see what that reveals as well. That's about it.
Thank you for bringing up the point, Mayor and Council has been taking another look at the program, and last week's Mayor and Council meeting, the Department of Transportation Mobility Director, Sam Credio, presented just some basic building blocks of what they're looking at. They didn't provide the specific named projects, but I think the one thing of note was that they were adding the consideration of a capital road repair program for arterial roads, major regional roads. Our original proposal from the county did include a category for road repair. There's been some conversation by committees, should it be included or not. It hasn't gotten a lot of traction thus far, but, we stand ready to evaluate and answer questions. There's been lots of discussions between ourselves and RTA staff and at various committees on how we want to look at both specific projects and some of these broader conversations.
Just one other observation, Madam Chair. I think given what was just said about the city's initiative, and given what we know about our own program, that we're at 20 million this year, dropping to 3 or 6 or whatever it is in the coming years, we might want to give some thought to whether our payment to them request would, I don't know what pavement rehabilitation as well. And then given today's discussion, I don't know what the county's position is going to be on transit expenses also, because obviously that's competing with the road stuff, so.
They're big discussions. 20 million is our low year. We're growing after this year, so be assured of that.
After this year?
Yeah, it's a little bit bigger next year. I don't know the number off the top of my head. 24 million next year.
Oh, and then what happens?
It continues to grow gradually through the end of 2030, and then we're trying to build a sustainable program so we'll be able to maintain it. That said, the costs of everything in transportation are increasing, and so, any funding that comes from the RTA Next is going to be complementary and just adding to the services that we can do in the unincorporated county. So I would not turn away from money for pavement repair, but I would also gladly accept it for bicycle, pedestrian, walkability projects, because like Nicole and Jonathan and Bonnie presented, I think we're at a unique time with a confluence of a lot of policy issues and growth issues. And so, funding just helps us address the whole host of growth issues in our community.
Okay.
Any other questions?
No questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we have call to the audience, Ms. Harris. And you have 3 minutes.
Well, I'm not really quite sure why I'm here, people, except that I west to a lot of Legislative District 20. I live on Caballo Road, which is in the south part of the Tucson Mountains. There are not many roads that cross these areas. You probably are aware of the immense on Ajo Way, Valencia Road, and to a certain extent Irvington Road, the only 3 east-west roads in the area. There also are not many north-south routes in that area. Camino de Oeste is one of these, and Camino de Oeste is in such terrible shape that when I walk around these neighborhoods and talk to people, and you say, why are you doing this? Well, I'm a precinct committee person, and it's part of my role to talk to people. We ask them, what are the things that bother you most? What are your issues? And time and again, it's the state of the roads, particularly Camino del Este. Although I live several miles south of Camino del Este, it's the road that I use to get to Ajo Way several times a day. If the people who live in the subdivisions, must be, I mean, it's more than half a dozen subdivisions that have been built off of Camino del Este in the last few years. Those people have to use that road, or there are, they can use Kenny, some of them can use Kenny, some of them can use Bilbray, but mostly they use Camino del Este. One of the neighbors there said that she felt that maybe part of the problem was all of the heavy construction vehicles that have been on that road in the past few years. But I know for a fact it hasn't been properly addressed, this roadway, in many, many years. Now, transportation did come in, I think it was June or July, and fill most of the many potholes. Of course, some of those have opened up, and there are new potholes. So, I'm sure you hear this kind of griping all the time. And as there was some letter that I saw that we can't fix everybody's roads, because if we have to fix your road, we have to take it away from somebody else. Well, I saw a lot of stuff on the north, down in some in the down. I didn't see a lot going on down in this area.
We'll provide a response to the concerns. We'll provide you with the response to your concerns. Okay. Future items for discussion. I heard earlier an I-11 update. I don't know if that can be on the next agenda. We can talk about that.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
Last week I was in a meeting and ADOT brought up, or an ADOT representative brought up, that the Tier 2 study of the Sonoran corridor is about to start within the next year. So if we could get an update from ADOT on the Sonoran corridor and what's that sitting right now, I'd appreciate it.
Okay. Any other future items? Okay, our next meeting is scheduled for October 24th. If you have anything else to add, please submit it to Annabelle by October 6th. And is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Tom motioned, second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.